Hello everyone, my name's Chris and this is Sound Workshop. We're on a mission to make expressive, electronic music instruments and to teach you how to make your own gadgets in the process. My first stab at this is something called Wiggler. This is a synthesizer with keys that wiggle for vibrato and they can push down for dynamics. I have to say that there's some problems with it that have been creeping up and have recently boiled over the surface. And the biggest of those problems is the fact that I can't slide between notes. So think about the song No One Noticed by the Marias. It goes, no one noticed, no one noticed. So it's constantly flipping back and forth between discrete jumps in pitch and smooth slides between notes. Wiggler can do all the vibrato you like, but it can never smoothly slide between pitches. So I went back to explore for other interfaces. And that brought me to something that's a little obscure in the synthesizer world called the Trautonium. And before I tell you about the Trautonium, let's zoom out a little bit and I want to talk to you about the original trifecta of expressive synthesizers. Each of these instruments is more obscure than the previous one and also a better design. The Theremin from Russia is the most famous of the trifecta, but also the hardest to play. It uses antennas to measure the positions of the artist's hands waving in the air. The artist's left hand controls volume and their right hand controls pitch, but there's zero tactile feedback, so it's wickedly hard to play in tune. So the second instrument on this list is the Ondes Martenot from France. It's a bit more obscure than the Theremin, but also a bit better of a design. Similar to the Theremin, the artist's left hand controls volume and the right hand controls pitch, but they're both done in a more tactile way. The left hand pushes on a spring-loaded block, a touch block called the touche, and the right hand slides along this tactile bar for controlling the pitch. And actually, the bar is right in front of a piano keyboard, so you basically just point at the key that you want to play, and the theremin will play that pitch. At the same time, this bar has grooves and bumps in it that correspond to the note positions, so you can even play it with your eyes closed. These tactile differences solve the pitchiness problem of the theremin, and the touche is a lot more responsive than waving your hands in the air. You can do little blips and blurb sounds. So it's a pretty great design, but it has the opposite problem that Wiggler has. The way that the pitch works is that you put your finger into a ring that's riding on a string or a ribbon. So you can only use one finger to play the notes, and you have to move that individual finger in between notes, which makes it difficult or maybe even impossible to do discrete jumps in pitch. You can't really do ba ba ba. Finally, there's the Trautonium, which is my favorite of this original trifecta. The Trautonium was invented in Germany by a guy named Trautwein and quickly picked up by his student named Oskar Zala. In my opinion, it's the best design. It has a touch bar, kind of similar to the Ondes Martenot's touch bar, but you don't have to put your finger into a ring. You just touch the bar anywhere along its length and the Trautonium will play that pitch. At the same time, this horizontal touch bar is floating on a spring-loaded mechanism, And the harder you push, the touch bar moves downward, which increases the volume of the amplifier and lets sound escape the instrument. Because there's no ring, you can use multiple fingers to do discrete jumps in pitch. At the same time, you only need one finger to make sound, which makes the coordination of pitch and volume expression a lot more intuitive. And it also leaves one hand free for turning knobs, which is half the fun of synthesizers. I want to try to prototype a Trautonium so I can feel what it's like to play one, because it's almost impossible to buy one. Kind of like a cooking show. I've already done it. Here we go. This is my sort of Frankenstein Trautonium. Let me show you how I made it. Okay, so this is the Otamatonium. It's the Frankenstein Otamatone Trautonium. There's four main elements. You've got the Otamatone, the Trautonium mechanism, a low-pass filter, and then a circuit for processing the sensor output. And they're all hot glued to a cutting board. And I just love using cutting boards as a cheap way to get a flat piece of wood that's just the size I need without any woodworking tools. By the way, if you haven't heard of an Otamatone yet, here it is. It's a music instrument toy from a Japanese company called Meiwa Denki, and you have continuous pitch control on the neck and a little bit of volume control with the mouth. But the way that the sound comes all the way on immediately as soon as you touch a note makes it really hard to play it elegantly. Okay, back to the Trautonium. Let me show you how it works. It all starts with the Otamatone, and the Otamatone is just providing the raw oscillator tone that is also pitch controlled by the touch sensor. It sounds like this. There's that brash Otamatone sound we all know and love. So the way I did this was I took an Otamatone, I took the neck out, I added some extension wires to the sensor, and then I just taped the sensor to my Trautonium mechanism. So now I need some way to control the brightness and the loudness of the sound, and for that I'm using a low-pass filter. This is my drone synth Chord, which has a low-pass filter and an external audio input. But instead of using a whole chord, I'm using a spare chord board, which had some broken aspects to it, but still a functional filter. So I took the audio output of the Otamatone and I plugged it into the external input of the chord. And I also had to go in here and desolder the speaker so that the speaker doesn't play, so that we're just listening to the sound through the filter. And now we can use the filter on chord to, animate the sound like this. So that sounds a lot better already, but I want to control the filter. Instead of by turning the knob, I want the vertical motion to do that. So that brings me to the mechanism here. This is something called a flexure, which is a bendy piece of rigid material. You could also call it a leaf spring. And the original Trautonium used axles and bearings and springs to achieve this vertical motion, but I'm using a flexure because it's simpler, it's just flat parts. So I designed all these flat pieces in CAD, in Onshape, and I ordered all them from sendcutSend.com, which can kind of cut anything you need out of flat shapes. So that gives me the vertical motion that I need. And then to measure the vertical motion, I'm using linear Hall effect sensors. Here they are right here. There's a magnet glued to the flexure and then the sensor next to the magnet. And the linear Hall effect sensor converts magnetic flux into voltage. So with those together, I can open the filter with the force that I apply. There you go. I should note that one drawback of the flexure is that it can tilt. So if I push all the way on one edge, then the opposite edge doesn't move as much. So the way I've accounted for that is I put a motion sensor on each end of the flexure, and then those two voltages are I take the average of those two voltage with this circuit here, which is an inverting op-amp mixer. And then that average value with a bias and a scaling factor is piped into the voltage control net of the filter on chord. So that's how I turn my Otamatone into a Trautonium. I've got some unfortunate news for the Wiggler fans out there, which is that I've decided to pause Wiggler and chase this Trautonium concept. I realized that my personal mission is to make a synthesizer that lets you play the melodies that people sing, because I think that singing is the most expressive possible instrument. Wiggler does have some awesome, admirable qualities, but unfortunately you just can't slide between notes. So about 6 months ago, I decided to do this pivot, and I put together this Otamatonium as a proof of concept. And once I played with it, it really sealed the deal, and I realized that this is the way to go. It feels amazing. So the pivot has been a setback on our schedule of getting instruments out into the wild, but the good news is that the wandering is over. I feel like I found something really special, and I know that this is it. So now I'm plotting a course to Shiptown, the straightest possible course. There's going to be a bunch of bumps, but now I know really clearly what the mission is, which is to make this Trautonium instrument. And actually, in the past 6 months, some collaborators have joined on the project, and we've made a ton of progress, and we've got a cool prototype that I want to show you. If you want to follow along on our journey, please subscribe here on YouTube or on Instagram. Both of those are sound.workshop. And if you don't use social media, we've got a mailing list on the website, link in the description. And if you want to financially support the mission, please consider joining our Patreon page. And any money that you contribute on Patreon will go directly to any future purchases with Sound Workshop. So thank you for watching all the way to the end. Please enjoy some sounds from the new thing, and stay tuned for more updates. Thank you. Goodbye. Thanks.